Revelation being. And the overall message that I hear here is that we need to recognize that He wants us, as individuals, as children of God, to be with Him. That's His overall goal. When you look at Genesis 1 and the creation, and that He dwelt with man until sin entered the world, and then throughout the whole book of whole Old Testament as well as the New Testament, we see this desire to rejoin man to God. And then in Revelation 22, we see that fulfillment in heaven, that we get to enjoy that. So everything in between is a journey. And I believe the book of Revelation is about that journey, but it's also about the fact that His desire is for all mankind to come to know Him, to have that relationship with Him. So looking at it through those glasses, as we've been looking at the different messages, there's sub-messages inside of the main message that He has. Today is probably one of the most difficult of the passages because of the fact that there's so many different ways of looking at it. You're going to see here in a moment that 6 times in the first half of this chapter, we see Him refer to the 1,000 years. Most people believe that the 1,000 years is a description of something, but not a literal 1,000 years. It's a figurative 1,000 years. Basically, the idea of the completion, the fullness. So during that 1,000 years, what happens, or before or after? So the problem comes in the fact that if we look at the 1,000 years as something that has already happened, we look at things in one view. If we look at it as something that is yet to come, we look at it in a different view. If we look at it as we are in the middle of that 1,000 years, then we have even yet a different view. So you can see how the confusion would come about in how we would look at this 1,000-year reign. Some do look at it as a literal 1,000 years. That presents some problems in the fact that if it was that we were living in that, then when did it start and when will it end, since it's been over 2,000 years since Christ came? If you look at it as from the perspective of it's already happened, then if it started and ended, then we got a problem, because then we should already be in heaven by now if we looked at it that way. But if we looked at it from the perspective of what I believe the author was trying to do, is present to us a description, a picture. I've mentioned this before, but one of the descriptions that he gives about heaven is that the roads are paved with gold, but not gold like we know, translucent gold. And the description of it, I personally believe, is not a literal description, but rather figurative, trying to help us to understand that it is beautiful. The most beautiful thing that we can imagine, because to us, gold is valuable. It's the most valuable thing we have. And so they paved the streets with gold. So if you took the most valuable thing that we have in this earth and paved the streets with it, and then make it even better by making it translucent, something even more beautiful, that picture is something that I believe John is trying to help us see, that heaven is going to be fantastic. And it's not even what we see, it's what we have. We will have the ability to fellowship with God. We're going to be talking about that in a couple of weeks here. But today, if you took that same mentality, that I want to draw a picture of something, what would it be that I want to draw a picture of? In this story we're going to read today, it's talking about Satan, but not just Satan, also those who worship him and follow him, those who are his servants. And we're going to look at this from a perspective of not necessarily a specific time, but that there is a chunk of time that this is going to happen in. Not the whole time, but a part of it. So we're going to look at it from that perspective. So he starts out in Revelation 20, verse 1. And I saw an angel coming down out of heaven, having the key to the abyss, and holding it in his hand, and holding in his hand a great chain. he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil, or Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. So he gives us 4 descriptions of Satan. These 4 descriptions, starting with the ancient serpent. What does that tell you? Going all the way back to Adam and Eve, when the serpent tempted Eve with the apple, with the fruit. Isn't it amazing how we get things planted in our mind? You know, with the wise men, we've got 3 wise men because there was 3 gifts. There had to be 3 wise men, right? But we get that in our mind, and then from then on, that's fact. So here we have an example of the 4 different names of Satan. That he is the ancient serpent. He is the beast, or the dragon. And also that he is Satan, the devil. So these 4 names for him, I think what John is trying to do is trying to help us see that it isn't a bunch of them, it's him in different names. Because he's used this dragon, the beasts, and other descriptions, and he's saying, okay, all of these names are referring to Satan. That this devil, the dragon, Satan, and the ancient serpent are all one. And he is bound. Another significant thing to notice here is that, you know, I would picture in my mind that it would be Jesus or God who would come and bind Satan. But it says it's an angel. An angel comes down from heaven and binds him with this chain. And the significance of that is that it doesn't even take God or Jesus. They are over it. They are the ones that bring that. But the angel is the one that is coming down to bind him and to throw him into the abyss. So it says that he threw him into the abyss and locked and sealed it over him to keep him from deceiving the nations anymore until 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be set free for a short time. This idea that Satan was thrown into this abyss and for 1,000 years, again, not necessarily a specific time, but that for a great amount of time, that Satan is being locked up. Satan is known as the master deceiver. He is the one that deceives. Think about your own life for just a moment here. When you think about deception, have you ever deceived anyone? Maybe you didn't flat out lie, you just kind of didn't tell them the truth. and you can be a little bit sly about things, you know, you kind of just hide the facts just a little bit so that no one knows the true truth. That's what Satan does, is he just kind of deceives a little bit. And lies a little bit. And pretty soon, we're deceived. We're led astray. How easy is it to fall for those lies, those deceptions? Satan has used this technique since the beginning of time. Like I mentioned, Eve was confronted by the serpent, and the serpent says to her, "Oh, that's what God said to you? That won't happen." You know, it didn't happen the way she may have thought it would, but it happened. God's word was true and faithful. And throughout the generations since, we have been deceived in different ways by Satan. And by deceiving us, he has separated us, kept us separated from God. Now, when we give our lives to God, when we give him Christ and we say, we want to follow you, the idea is that we're bridging that gap between our inability to be perfect and his perfection, his truthfulness, faithfulness. And we're bridging that gap because of the cross. And when we begin to follow Christ, give our lives to him, we are crossing that barrier because of his death, his burial, and his resurrection. And so that's what we're talking about here. The deceiver wants to deceive us. He wants to keep us from being with God. And he has used that deception. So here, as we see this picture evolving, this movie being laid out, we see that this great deceiver is being thrown into the abyss. And he says in verse 4, I saw thrones on which were seated those who had been given authority to judge. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony for Jesus and because of the word of God. I looked up this idea of the beheading, and in reality it's more of a martyr, not necessarily only those who were beheaded, but rather those who were willing to die for what they believed in. So those who were martyred, persecuted, killed for the sake of Christ, they are the ones that are being represented here. There is going to be a little bit of confusion coming up here because he's talking about the fact that they will rise first. The confusion comes is there two resurrections? Is there a first resurrection, a second resurrection, which is the way most of our Bibles would indicate, but there's never a second resurrection mentioned. It's just the one resurrection here. So what is this talking about? So, and these thrones, those who are set to judge, those who are picked or chosen to be seated on the throne, to be in the judgment seat, and those who were persecuted as well, present. And then he says, they had not worshipped the beast or his image, and had not received his mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. Again, that time, that period of time, whatever that time really is, in days, months, years, whatever, it's a large part of time that this is going to happen. We read in, I believe it's 1 Thessalonians, that a day, to God, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. So we don't really know what that time period would be. But the emphasis is that it's the complete time. Whatever that time is, it is complete or full. So in verse 6, or at the end of verse 5, it says, this is the first resurrection. And this is where some of the confusion comes from. But he goes on, he says, blessed and holy are those who have part in the first resurrection. The second death has no power over them, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and will reign with him for 1,000 years. So those who were raised at this time, those who come to life, those are the ones that are going to be standing with Jesus, that are going to be judging with Jesus. I want you to think for just a moment. If you were there in the day that these people were being persecuted, if you were there and you were watching your loved ones die, or you yourself were being killed for your faith, for your belief, how would you feel if you were asked to sit in the judgment seat? For instance, let's say that one of your loved ones was killed in an accident where the drunk driver was involved, and you were asked to sit on the jury. Why don't they do that? Because you're definitely going to be biased, right? And you're going to probably give the harshest possible sentence and no grace to the situation. But here, God selects those who have been through this to sit on this judgment seat. And I asked myself, why would he choose them? Why would he give them that opportunity? I think there's a obvious reason that Satan is the one that's being judged, that it is his followers that are being judged. And those who have been persecuted, who have died for their faith, martyred, are the ones that were most affected by that. But I wonder if there's not a hidden reason here. I wonder if these people who are truly dedicated to following Christ, who was willing to give up their lives for them, I wonder if maybe God sees in them the character, being of Christ being represented in them because of their love for mankind and their willingness to die for what they believed in. And so these people are asked to stand in this judgment. But in verse 7 it comes out and it says, when the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. This one confused me a little bit because I'd never even heard, I know I have heard of Gog and Magog, but I didn't remember. Gog and Magog were in the descendants and representing two divisions. Basically, they became separate nations, and all of the descendants come from those two. And so the idea, the concept of this is that it's all mankind, from one extreme to the other, from north to south, from east to west. All mankind is going to fall into this realm and to fall into this judgment. But I want to remind you that we're going to see here in a little bit that those who are following Christ, those who are standing before God as believers, clothed in the garments of Jesus, will stand before him already pure and holy and worthy, not because of us, but because of the Lamb. So this is something important. So he goes on there in verse 9. They marched across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of God's people, the city that he loves. This made me think of a time when a prophet stood next to the king and they watched the enemy all around them and they were petrified. And the servant of the prophet standing next to him says, what are we going to do? There are so many of them. We can't fight this great battle. And the prophet says to his helper, if only you could see what's really out there. And so he says, God, can you open the eyes of this, my servant? And so he opens his eyes and he sees all around the enemy the army of God, which far outnumbers the army that's around them. And then what do you have to be afraid of? Because this army that was very frightening a moment ago becomes overshadowed by God's army. So we see the same picture. The same picture is that we see Satan and his followers, and they have got all of their warriors together to come and battle against us. And he comes and encircles the city of God that he loves. And again, I don't believe that this is a specific city, but more or less the idea of all of his people in one place. And this enemy, Satan and his army, has encircled them. And they are about to attack, but have no fear. It says, but fire came down from heaven and devoured them. When we start thinking about the world and everybody that's against us, or those who want to persecute us, or those that have an agenda that they're pushing, and we think, man, how are we going to beat them? How are we going to conquer? How can we? I think we're doing the wrong thing. Instead of saying, how are we going to? We should be saying, I know God's going to defeat this. I know he's going to win. So how is he going to do it? So when we see the enemy around us, instead of being intimidated, instead of being fearful, instead of feeling that we are going to lose, instead we know that the victory already belongs to the Lord. And so he's standing there, and they see this fire come down from heaven and devour them. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophets had been thrown. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who was seated on it. Earth and sky fled from his presence, and there was no place for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. The dead were judged according to what they had done, as recorded in the books. The sea gave up the dead that were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead that were in them. And each person was judged according to what he had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. The lake of fire is the second death. If anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. This seems ominous to me. When I read that, it seemed scary, frightful, even overwhelming. But when you look closely at this, what is he saying? There is a book of life. This book of life contains the names of those who are following God, who are written in the book of life for eternity. No one can take it out. No one can remove those names. And who is written in that book of life? Those who believe in God and trust Him. Those who've given their lives to Him. He has written our names in that book. And no matter what Satan does, he cannot take us out of that book. Nor can anyone else. I believe that God is giving us a message here. And that message is that those who choose to not follow me will suffer the consequences, just like Satan and his followers. But those who choose to follow me, who give their lives to me, I have already written your name in the book of life. This book that's opened up, it talks about that there are multiple books, right? But this book, the book of life, is the guarantee of our salvation. The other books, they contain maybe the deeds. It references the fact that we will be judged by the things that we did or didn't do. But ultimately, the book of life, that's where our salvation is. That's what we count on. So going back again and looking at this, if you were going to try to summarize this part of the movie, it would be easy to get lost in the 1,000 years or the time frame or when this happened. But the message is the same no matter what. The message is that God can deliver us. Not only that, He has already promised us that He will deliver us. And no matter how big, how wicked, how scary Satan and his deception is, it holds not even a candle to God. His power, His might, His promise, His faithfulness. We can look at all of these things and we can see that we have no reason to be fearful. We have no reason to be overwhelmed by Satan and his demons. Yet, we have every reason to believe that God can and will deliver us. As we stand there looking at the world, and we see all of the world that has to offer, Satan is trying to deceive us, to try to suck us into the world, as we looked at last week. His desire is to suck us into that world and the thinking that that is our security, that that's where we have some kind of a grasp on things. But he says, no, if you want to grasp on the things that are important, let go of that. Instead, put your trust and faith in me, God. Because when we put our faith and trust in Him, then He has already given us what He wants us to have. He wants us to have that eternal life. He wants us to have that fellowship with one another. He wants us to have the fellowship with Him. Those things come by surrendering the things that we think are important in the world around us and giving over to God's wisdom, His blessings. Now, one of the confusions that happened in the Jewish tradition was that there was a belief that if you were blessed with great riches, then you must be a righteous person. If you are blessed with great wealth, then man, he must have been a good person. Job, I believe, was written for the purpose of debunking that theory. That basically saying he was a righteous man. He was holy. He even offered sacrifices for his family and his kids in case they might have sinned. Not because he knew they had, but just in case he offered these sacrifices. And yet Satan attacked him. The reason I'm saying this is because that theory that financial wealth is tied directly to God's blessings may or may not be true. I believe that God will bless us. I believe that God does bless us. But counting on that as being the answer, that's not the blessing that he's promised us. The blessing that he's promised us is eternal life. The blessing that he's promised us is that we would be washed pure, clean, and holy in the sight of God because of what Jesus has done for us. So when we look at this story, we can see this battle going on. The battle that we face every day. Who do we choose? Who do we put our faith in? Who do we trust? Do we trust the world or do we trust him? I choose to trust God. I don't do it perfectly. I make mistakes every day. And I can guarantee you that most of you do the same. We make mistakes. We're not perfect. But God judges us not based on what we've done, but on whose clothing we are wearing. Just as we talked last week about the wedding ceremony. We are wearing the wedding clothes